Welcome back, students. In today's session, I'll be talking more about the peasant revolution and the tribal revolutions that occurred during the Indian national movement. Please pay attention to this because there may be a question which may come up in the board exams. As the topic itself mentions peasant and tribal movements, so there were several revolts and movements which wherein actively the participation came from the peasants, the worker class, and the tribals. Why should we mention about these peasants and their movements? Because the Britishers made many land laws which compelled the peasants to pay the land revenue. Taxes had to be paid. These peasants were exploited by the zamindars and also the revenue officials and many money lenders. So the peasants could not take the burden of paying the taxes because of several failures. It could be a crop failure, it can be famine, it can be the drought of the nature. Many revolts occurred in the 19th and the early 20th century, wherein out of them, very important revolts is what I'm going to walk you through. The first and foremost revolt by the peasants happened or occurred in the year 1857, between 1859 and 1860. So this was the Indigo Revolt. So Indigo Revolt occurred in Bengal, which was directed against the British planters who had forced the peasants to take advances and sign fraudulent contracts, and they forced the peasants to grow indigo under terms which were the least profitable to them, which means there was no any profit for the peasants by growing indigo, but they were forced to plant indigo in their lands. This revolt actually began in a village called Govindpur in Bengal, and this was led by the leader called Digambar Biswas and Vishnu Biswas. So what they did was they organized the peasants into a counter force deal with the planters or the armed retainers. And in the year 1860, all the cultivators of this subdivision called Barasat and the districts of Pabna and Nadia, they resorted to strike. They refused to sow or plant any indigo. So the strike spread to all other places in Bengal. So the revolt got the support from all the categories of rural population, then the missionaries themselves, and also the Bengal very popular congressmen or intelligentsia. And the next very important revolt was the Pabna movement, which occurred between 1872 and 76. But the intense period was between 1875. In East Bengal, the peasants were oppressed by the zamindars through, it can be harassment, it can be arbitrary enhancement of rent, through seizures, and by using force on these peasants. The zamindars also tried to prevent them from acquiring the occupancy rights. In May 1873, an agrarian league was formed, according to which the payments of enhanced rents were refused. The peasants did not agree to pay the increased rents. They fought against the Britishers, and this was called as a no land revenue campaign. There was also an inquiry committee which was appointed to look into why the peasants are revolting against the no land revenue, and some of their demands were later on incorporated in the Tenancy Acts, which were introduced by the British in 1885. So the next very important revolt was the Deccan Peasants Revolt, which happened between 1875 and 1879. This revolt was against the Marwadis and the Gujarati money lenders. So social boycott of money lenders by the peasants were later transformed into an armed peasant revolt, which means peasants started to revolt and fight like soldiers. In the district of Pune and Ahmednagar of Maharashtra, this revolt was quite aggressive. The peasants attacked the moneylenders' houses, their shops, and also burned them down. And one more important revolt after the Deccan Revolt was the Punjab peasants' discontentment, which happened between 1890 to 1900. So this was directed against the enactment of the Punjab Land Allocation Act. Rural people were indebted, and large scale of agricultural lands and non-cultivating classes led to the peasants' discontentment in Punjab. The communal complexion of Punjab rural situation and also the martial character of the Sikhs called for an early effective action by the government. The Punjab peasants, they were given partial relief after this revolt by the Britishers, and also the land revenue which was demanded by the peasants, the government agreed that the land revenue would not exceed beyond 50% of whatever annual rental value of the land was there. Very important, one more very important revolution was the Mopla Rebellion, which occurred in 1921. So this was the discontentment of the peasants, which occurred in the Malabar district of Kerala. Here, Mopla, which means Muslim, these tenants rebelled. So their grievances was the lack of any security of tenure, the land tenure, whatever the land they possess, the renewal of the fees, and it could be the high rents what they're paying to the lands, and other oppressive landlord attitudes. And out of this, the next very important was the Bardoli Satyagraha. So what is this Bardoli Satyagraha? This Satyagraha happened in the year 1928. According to this, the enhancement of land revenue was 20%, 22% actually in the district of Bardoli, which is in present day Gujarat. Here also a no revenue campaign was launched under the leadership of Vallabhbhai Patel. Unsuccessful attempts by the British to suppress this movement by large scale attachment of cattle and land resulted in the appointment of an inquiry committee. So a committee which was conducted by the person called Broomfield and Maxwell came to the conclusion that the increase had been unjustified and they had to reduce the enhancement to 6%. And let's talk about the very two important satyagrahas, which is called Champaran Satyagraha, which occurred in the year 1917, and the other one called the Kheda Satyagraha. Why are these two satyagrahas important? This is important because these were led under the leadership of Gandhiji. So let's talk about Champaran Satyagraha. So the peasants who were forced to grow the indigo plantations in Champaran district, which is in Bihar, were excessively oppressed by the European planters. They were compelled to grow indigo for at least the 3/20th of their land, and they had to sell this indigo at fixed prices to these planters. They saw no profit. The peasants saw no profit. So accompanied by the Rajendra Prasad and J.B. Kriplani, Gandhiji reached Champaran in the year 1917, and he began to conduct a detailed inquiry into the conditions of the peasants. So this angered the district officials, and they ordered Gandhi and Rajendra Prasad and other congressmen to leave Champaran. But Gandhiji defied or denied this order, and he was even willing to face the imprisonment. Later on, the government developed or they had a discussion with Gandhiji, and they had an inquiry committee which occurred in June 1917, including Gandhiji. And later on, the Agrarians Act gave or declared that taxes would not be levied on the indigo planters. Champaran is very important because it was led by Gandhiji himself. Remember, Gandhiji entered the Indian national, the third phase in the year 1920 fully. But after his return from South Africa in 1915, he was actively involved in supporting the peasants, the farmers, and the tribal revolution. So Champaran is one of the important satyagrahas, the foremost satyagrahas, which was led by Gandhiji. After this Champaran satyagraha, the next very important satyagraha, which was led by Gandhiji, was in the year 1918 for Kheda satyagraha. In 1918, we know that while explaining the impact of First World War, I mentioned that during the after the First World War had ended, in the year 1918, there was huge famine, the crops had failed, there was also a epidemic called influenza. Here in the year 1918, when the crops had failed in the district of Kheda, which is in modern day Gujarat, the government refused to remit or reduce the land revenue, but they insisted to pay the taxes in full. There was no reduction, there was no courtesy showed towards the peasants. Gandhiji, along with Vallabhbhai Patel, he supported the peasants and advised them to withhold the payments of revenues till their demand was fulfilled. This satyagraha, this lasted till June 1918, and the government had to concede or accept the demands of the peasants. This can also be considered as a no tax payment campaign, which was led by Gandhiji. Okay. While all these revolutions were happening, so the peasants were organized into Kisan Sabhas in the provinces. Like, Sabhas were opened in Uttar Pradesh, which was called as Uttar Pradesh Kisan Sabha, and then we had Awadh Kisan Sabha. Many Sabhas, came up in the states of Bengal, Bihar, Punjab, and even till today, the first All India Kisan Congress was established in the year 1936, and even today, the 1st of September every year, it is celebrated as All India Kisan Day all over India. As well as the workers who were working for the farmers or in the lands, they were also organized. Who were working in the industries were also organized under trade unions. All India trade unions or the Congress trade unions were established as early as 1921, which included all the working people who supported in the fight against the Britishers. So apart from this, we also had some uprisings from the tribes. Not only peasants, the tribes also equally participated in the struggle. They had their own intentions, they had their own problems to express, they had their own demands. But what was the reason for the tribals to revolt? The tribals' mainstay was shifting agriculture. They used to hunt, they used to fish, and use the products that they used to get from the forest. With the coming of non-tribals into their regions, so the practice of settled agriculture was introduced. This led to the loss of land for the tribal people. They were reduced or being landless, and they had to take up jobs as agricultural laborers. And moreover, the Britishers introduced money lenders, the Gujaratis and the Marwadis, into these tribal areas, which led to severe exploitation of these tribals. So they became bonded laborers to these money lenders. There was no chance for them to come out of this bonded slavery. The tribal societies had the system of joint ownership of land, which was again replaced by the notion of private properties, private estates. The British, they also introduced restrictions. They imposed restrictions on using forest products, on shifting agriculture, and also on hunting practices. This led to the loss of livelihood for the tribals. of the major tribal revolutions or the uprisings that occurred is what we will be discussing now. The first and foremost very important tribal revolution was that of the Kol rebellion. So these Kols inhabited in the Chota Nagpur area of Bihar. So they lived under complete autonomy under their traditional chiefs. But this changed when the Britishers came there. The Kols lost their lands to the farmers who had come from outside, and they had to pay huge amounts of money in terms of taxes. They became bonded laborers. They killed many of the outsiders, and they even burnt their houses during this revolution, which happened in 1831 and 1832. So, though the revolt was fierce, the Britishers were easily able to suppress this because of their superior weapons, which the tribal people did not possess. And the very important tribal revolution after the Kols was Santal revolution, which happened in the year 1855. The present day Jharkhand, the states of Jharkhand, Orissa and West Bengal, these were the places where most of the tribes belonging to the Santal community lived. With the introduction of Zamindari system by the Britishers, this Santal revolution came into action, we can say. So this Zamindari, when Britishers introduced this Zamindari system, they claimed the traditional Santal land as their own, which means the land that belonged to the tribals was declared as the lands of the Zamindars. The Santals were again exploited mercilessly by these landlords who increased the land revenue taxes. And the money what they had lent to these tribals was, the interest rate for this was very high, which the tribes could never be able to repay. So they turned into bonded laborers again. See, most of the tribal revolutions, it is very simple to remember. Their lands were confiscated, was captured, they became bonded laborers, restrictions were imposed on hunting and use of forest products. Money lenders used to exploit these people. All these points what I mentioned is quite common for any tribal revolutions. Okay. Out of these, very important tribal revolution was that of the Birsa Munda revolution. Let's see who was Birsa Munda. So outsiders, when they occupied this place where the Munda community lived, the Munda community was not able to take it because their movements had social and religious overtones. The tribals fought against the Britishers using their traditional weapons, that is the bows, arrows, lathis and axes, which was not superior or which was not, they did not possess weapons which was good enough to face the Britishers. One such revolution was also the Birsa Munda as said. The Mundas basically lived in the Chota Nagpur area, and they were following a joint holding of land system. So which means jointly two people will be the owners of a land. They had followed this system for many years. But when the Britishers introduced the Zamindari system, according to this, only one person would be the land owner for whatever land he possesses. This caused great resentment among the tribal community, and as the outside zamindars were replaced by their Khunkati system, the tribals were indebted and they were forced to become laborers for the zamindars. It was under the leadership of Birsa Munda where he revolted against the landlords, the moneylenders, and the merchants. So the Mundas were proclaimed a rebellion in 1894. He requested or urged the people to stop paying debts and taxes. So Birsa Munda was later on arrested and sent to jail for 2 years before he was released in 1897. Again, in December 1899, he launched the armed struggle on the landlords and the government. The Mundas, the Birsa Munda and his community tribes, they burnt out the police stations, the houses of the landlords, the churches were burnt out, and also the British properties were destroyed. So in 1900, finally, Birsa Munda was caught, and then he died because of cholera. So some of the other tribal revolutions that happened when it comes to northeast of India was that of the Khasi rebellion, which was led under the leadership of Tirat Singh. And also we had the Jaintias who revolted, and basically the Nagas also fought against the Britishers when the Britishers conquered their land under the Zamindari system. So in places of like Manipur, Nagaland, Mizoram, where you had the Lushai Hills, there were also tribal uprisings. So the Koki rebellion, which happened in the year 1917 and continued till 1918, was also suppressed. So Ting Tong was one of the leaders who was very famous from the Kuki tribes. And then when it comes to Manipur, the Zheilonggrong people, they also revolted against the Britishers under the leadership of Jadonang. So after Jadonang was executed, he was captured and put to death. He was executed in the year 1931. His disciple, Gaidinlu, she revolted or continued the revolt against the Britishers. So in 1932, when she was also arrested and imprisoned. So when Gaidinlu was arrested, Jawaharlal Nehru came to know about her imprisonment, and then he personally met her and urged for her early release. So in the year 1947, India became independent. So it was him who gave this title called Rani to her, because she fought valiantly and she fought for the rights of women and also the rights for possessing the food products. So these were some of the very important tribal revolutions that was supported or which supported the growth of nationalism in India. So with this, children, the chapter comes to an end. So immediately after the session is completed, I will be sharing the 1 mark questions, the 2 marks and the 3 mark questions as home assignment. So I hope you have understood the chapter. If you have any doubt, you can ping it or you can discuss, you can share your questions collaboratively with your class teacher, and I will take the questions to you and try to explain it to you further. Alright, thank you very much for listening to me, students. Have a nice day.